Hey folks, Farmer Dar here. It's Bibs Day, but I'm behind on laundry, so I have no bibs today. So I'm out here and back by the Aldi greenhouse with my dog Luna back here barking for me. Luna says hello. She wants to know who I'm talking to. Oh, she also sees neighbors walking by. Okay, she calmed down. She might start again when she thinks I'm talking to somebody. So I'm out here in the sunshine, enjoying some much needed time in the garden, thinking about what I'm going to do finishing off this afternoon. But I thought it was time to do another witnessing because I'm witnessing something and I just want to speak it aloud. I just want to speak it aloud and put it out there, and then maybe it becomes part of the larger conversation. Maybe not. We'll see. So eugenics. I am witnessing eugenics, and I have said this many times over the last few years, that I definitely perceive that we have a domestic and foreign policy grounded in eugenics. I've come to understand this because of my studies as a student, particularly in science education, and if you're not aware, science has a history that is steeped in racism. Specifically, there's a branch of study that was very popular in the 18th, 19th, and early 20th century called eugenics. And this study of eugenics, it really was conducted with the leading politicians in the U.S., leading the charge. If you read some of Thomas Jefferson's work, specifically the Virginia Papers, I forget the year, I can put it in the links for you, there was eugenics involved, and it was in the guise of trying to understand racial differences, but also just flat out racist goals of this idea of racial purity, a eugenics idea. Much of what we know as eugenics, it's enacted culturally and politically. So it steeps in culture as well as it falls into our government policies. And a lot of what we have in science, specifically in biology and anthropology, it has its origins in eugenics. A lot of what we have in statistics, for example, the bell curve, also has its origins in eugenics. So much of what we do today needs to be filtered through this history of eugenics so that we understand where these ideas have come from, and then maybe we can catch and stop doing eugenics. So eugenics has been a cultural and political phenomenon that's been conducted mostly by skin-privileged or white European descendant colonizer cultures and countries. Certainly eugenics has been practiced in the United States. In fact, many ideas that have founded eugenics originated in the United States. I can attach an article that gives you a little bit of backstory on that. Eugenics has at least two major prongs. Certainly, I'm sure there's more. I do not consider myself an expert on this topic. I just consider myself self-studied on this topic. One branch of eugenics is known as positive eugenics. There is nothing positive about it. It is absolutely, positively the worst thing. I want to be very clear as I give you information about eugenics. It is not a good thing. It is not a desirable thing. The other prong is negative eugenics. Again, eugenics is not good. Positive eugenics and negative eugenics. Both eugenics are not a good thing. They are racist. They are harmful. In history, people that did eugenics, they had this idea of positive eugenics. Now, keep in mind, these are people who are enacting racism. So these are things that white nationalists would find positive, okay? So positive is not only a term that is to be thought of as mathematical in when we're thinking about eugenics, but it's also about what is considered desirable, okay? And so this does link back to racist notions of the ideal form. So positive eugenics, which are not positive, by the way, it is about who can breed with whom. And I say that as crass as it sounds. It is about breeding. It is literally about breeding. But in eugenics, it really is literally about who can breed with whom and controlling that. And it can be very innocuous sounding. For example, when someone says, "Oh, aren't they a cute couple? Wouldn't they just make lovely babies?" And they're referring to cisgender, heterosexual white people. That is a form of that eugenics thinking. Now, I'm sure a person is not consciously thinking, please make white babies. We are looking for the ideal form and you are making them. But what we culturally hold up as the ideal form too frequently is someone who is white, who is cisgender, who is heterosexual, who is able-bodied. We have in our culture this habit of pushing that comment down earlier and earlier, younger and younger. Sometimes people ask young children, who's your boyfriend, who's your girlfriend? And sometimes it is just innocent, but some of it is that conditioning of, approving of who our children are going to associate with. Frequently we're racializing those questions and comments, giving our assent to some relationships and giving our disapproval to other relationships. So that some of that is eugenics thinking that has led into our today's language. We don't call it eugenics, but some of it is. There have been in the past times when the government would give great benefits to newly formed families. Pre-1960s, there used to be wonderful tax breaks and subsidies to help families, which, by the way, were all white, get into new homes and get into neighborhoods and get into schools. And then some of the more obvious and unpleasant positive, not really positive, but forms of so-called positive eugenics would be the anti-miscegenation laws that really dictated who could marry whom. And these laws were designed to maintain this mythical racial purity. These laws are only recently overturned, and you will find people still are very vocal about who can be with whom across racial lines. Where do LGBTQ people fall into this whole idea of positive eugenics? Okay, so, there's a lot of diversity in the LGBTQ community. But if you are skin privileged in this community, you are expected to be a person who bears more children. And for people who believe in positive eugenics, whether they call it that or not, you are expected to bear children with light skin, if you are in fact light-skinned. LGBTQ people, we sometimes bear children, we sometimes don't. And we soundly take discretion away from the community about our terms of birthing children. We defy community a number of ways by having, non-traditional families, if you will, completely ignoring recommendations about family configuration makes us a threat to eugenics, which you don't want to be supporting eugenics. Unfortunately, skin-privileged LGBTQ people frequently don't understand the white supremacy around us, and so we sometimes perpetuate the same ideology without really critically thinking about it. For so-called positive eugenics to work, the state must take control of decision-making for anyone who has a uterus. If the goal of a community is positive eugenics, if the goal of a community is racial purity, here's where you end up with a situation where racism really does in fact hurt us all. Skin-privileged or white people with a uterus are expected to contribute to those eugenics goals. whether you want to or not. So once bodily autonomy is taken from anyone who has a uterus, we end up with a situation where white women, white people with uteruses, are treated as vessels and have their choices taken away about when they will birth and under what conditions. This leaves them all open as prey for cisgender males who are hell-bent on control, who are absolutely in favor of positive eugenics and racial purity. Now I'm going to go ahead and take a minute and just suss out this idea of so-called negative eugenics. All eugenics are improper and bad and negative, but in this case the term negative eugenics is both mathematical and meant to assign a value for what is undesirable. It's really important to understand this concept of negative eugenics because it has not in fact ever stopped. Please let me explain. So, negative eugenics is about controlling or depressing or suppressing different people from being able to bear children. Negative eugenics can happen at both the cultural and at the political levels. At the cultural level, negative eugenics might be terrorizing the community with white nationalist symbols, making clear that people of color or Jewish people are not welcome in that community. It could be the terrorizing of people of color verbally, with symbols, the burning of churches, to make sure that they are told they are unwelcome in a community. Sundown towns are a form of eugenics. Redlining are a form of eugenics. Deportations are a form of negative eugenics, removing from the community any person who is not viewed to be racially pure. Forced sterilizations. As recently as a decade ago, you can find stories about forced sterilizations in prisons. Intentionally creating poverty zones or ghettos, redlining, the intentional dumping of waste, police brutality, the killing and terrorizing of black people and other people of color. In particular, in the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan developed the whole idea of the welfare queen, quickly government benefits and government assistance to families started to get cut off. The whole idea of having drug tests before you give SNAP benefits to families with children. These are all negative eugenics. Anything designed to make it more difficult to raise a child of color in the United States is negative eugenics. High infant mortality rates due to not allowing good health care throughout the region. Negative eugenics. The removal of males from the community so that they can't be around to raise their children. This is also contributing to negative eugenics. So in this reproductive rights conversation, the stopping of the bans on abortion, we really need to recognize how a lot of what we're dealing with right now is just an advancing of eugenics. Right now, there are several states that are advancing the idea of positive eugenics, controlling and taking away the bodily autonomy of people who have a uterus. With that control, then making decisions culturally within families, within communities, or structurally, politically, at the community level or at the law level about who can bear a child and who cannot and under what circumstances. I understand the term eugenics is not favored language of today. In fact, I think we would all like to think that eugenics is just something from the past that we hopefully regret and would not dare think of doing again. But in fact, eugenics never stopped. It just stopped being called eugenics. I think we want to believe that it was the Germans who did eugenics. and that once World War II was over and genocide, that then eugenics was over. But in fact, the Germans learned their version of eugenics from the US. Why is this important? Well, if we fail to understand how eugenics has been used to advantage and to harm people, we're going to go through this dialogue of stopping the bans, and we're going to fail to acknowledge that when we're fighting, we're usually fighting for the most advantaged among us. Yes, this is definitely about a person's right to choose what they do with their uterus, but that one choice is part of a much larger program. Failing to see that, we're only going to fight for the most advantaged among us. Remember, eugenics excludes people of color from these conversations of choice. People who have disabilities or different abilities, and certainly LGBTQ people, are not considered very helpful. We need to recognize that these intersecting oppressions frequently create a much more difficult landscape for some people than others. So the second reason I'll go ahead and say that this is important is because racism hurts everyone. When I first heard the idea that racism hurts everyone, I was a little skeptical. It is pretty clear to me how racism hurts people of color. It has not always been clear to me how racism hurts the skin-privileged, white-advantaged people. But the more I think about the ways we can contort ourselves, we twist our culture to maintain this idea of white supremacy, the more I understand the way we're treated as vessels to bear children without choice in the matter, the more I recognize that as a race issue, the more I see how racism hurts us. So the structures that would treat you as a vessel and one that has no choice about bearing children and would control the skin tone of your children, that is a harmful community. And the structures that you'd be subjected to ensure the birth of children with skin privilege, those would be violent and harmful. Okay, so that's my fumbling through this idea of eugenics and how it pertains to the current bans on abortion. But on this idea of eugenics, I really would encourage everybody to understand this history and try to see where the entrails of that history drags culture in this white nationalist direction. I would recommend, if you want to know a little bit more about the origins of race and racism, that you go check out the YouTube channel, The Origin of Everything. The Origin of Everything with Danielle Bainbridge. She really does some wonderful talks. She's a really great history buff, and I would love for her to do a quick show on eugenics. I think she would have so much good insight. Well, thank you for watching this witnessing episode, Witnessing Eugenics. I think if we look closely enough, we can see that eugenics is alive and well, and that while we don't really call it that, there are in fact many pressures giving affordances to some people and constraints to other people. If you're interested in more videos like this, please check out other videos that have been made in the Witnessing the Whiteness series. These videos are inspired by a program at the YWCA in St. Louis, Witnessing Whiteness, and this is just my version of what that work looks like. All right, thank you so much for watching.